very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Siddharth Sharath Kumar, or just Sid if that's easier, and I'm from the IT Security Solutions team at Manage Engine, and I will be your presenter and host for today's session. Before we get started, I just want to take a pause for 30 seconds. I just want to make sure there's no issue with the audio and no issues with viewing my shared screen. So in case you have any issues with the audio or with the shared screen, do reach out to us on the live chat option on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try to fix your issues, right? So if everything is fine, we just wait for about 20-30 seconds just to make sure everyone is all right with the setup, and then get started. Right, so I hope there are no issues. It looks like we're all good to go. I just want to get a couple of routine housekeeping things out of the way before we start the webinar. The first is that we are all available on the live chat. That includes myself and 5 of our product consultants. So as and when you have any questions over the course of the webinar, do reach out to us on the live chat. It could be the material that is being discussed, or it could be something else that you want to dive deeper into and discuss. So make use of the brains that we've got for today's session, and our technical consultants will be able to guide you through with the challenges that you might be facing in your environment, right? So that's number one. And number two is that we'll be sending you a recording of today's session. So we'll be sending you a video recording of today's webinar along with the slide deck, and we'll try to send some other material if possible in the form of ebooks and the like. So you'll be getting that within a couple of days as well, so you can share it with your colleagues if you'd like, right? So the live chat, some of you have already just been asking a couple of questions on the chat. So make use of this. We are going to be answering questions throughout the webinar, because we might not be able to dive deep into each section. So in case you need more details or you have environment specific concerns, you can discuss these things with our technical consultants over the course of the webinar, right? So this is the agenda that we have for today's session. We're essentially concerned about two very, very important components in our Windows infrastructure, right? This includes our SQL servers and IIS web servers, right? So our databases and web servers. And we're going to be looking at the importance of setting up auditing on these sources. We look at how we can get started with implementing this in our environment. And we'll also look at specific events that we want to track on databases and on web servers, and exactly how we can do this by using a SIM solution, right? And over the course of the webinar, I'm not going to make this a product specific session, but over the course of the webinar, I want to jump into Manage Engine's SIM solution, which is Log 360, and sort of use just use the interface to give you more details about the things that we're discussing, right? We're not going to go and do a full-on product demo and make this a sales pitch, but instead I'm just going to use the product to illustrate certain things that we are discussing in the webinar, right? So this is what we have essentially. We're going to be looking at the importance of auditing, why we need to implement auditing in our SQL and IIS servers. We're going to look at exactly how we go about doing this, like an overview of the steps that we need to take. We're going to be looking at specific events that we need to track. And then we're going to bring in the SIEM perspective of being able to schedule reports to periodically review different activities and set up some alerts and correlation rules to detect complex attack scenarios, right? So this is what we have in store today. And like I said, I'm just repeating again that we're available on the live chat. I will try to answer some of the questions in real time if possible, or maybe just take the questions as a live Q&A session at the end of the webinar if time permits. But apart from that, throughout the webinar, we're going to be answering questions on the live chat. So keep your questions coming, and hopefully you'll get some good insights into some of the issues that you might be facing in your environment, right? So let's get started with the actual session, right? So I just want to, before we start, I want to ask you guys, what do you think is the most important task for any administrator, right? So if I were to say, as an administrator, what is your number one priority, or what is the number one task that you concern yourself with, right? What would you say, right? Normally people would say a whole bunch of things like ensuring smooth IT management, ensuring smooth operations and things like that. But in my view, for any administrator in any company, two primary objectives uh, is what they do, right? You have uh, availability and security, right? I'm sure you agree with me. These are the two most important things for any administrator: ensuring availability and ensuring security, right? So when it comes to these two specific things, there are a lot of challenges in today's security landscape that come in the way of availability and security, right? Because you have much more complex environments, you have a lot of things that go beyond the office network perimeter on the cloud and things like that, and you have a whole bunch of advanced threats out there to your different critical resources, that it's become very hard to focus and ensure availability and security, right? And this is something that we don't even need to discuss, because this is reality and we all know this, right? But here is what I want to talk about. I want to say that in the process of ensuring availability and security, now is a good time to turn your focus to databases and web servers, right? Because if, I mean, we all know that, and we call databases and web servers as business critical applications, right? And that's because our businesses rely on databases and web servers for day-to-day functioning, right? And in case you have, everyone has a website today, like every business today has a website. And in case you're in e-commerce or something like that, your website is a direct source of revenue, right? So if your web server is down, it's going to not only affect operations, but it's also going to affect revenue for that day, right? So the main reason, we all know that databases and web servers are business critical applications and must be secure. But in 2018, I'm going to show you a few figures from, and these are from Verizon's 2018 data breach investigations report. A lot of phenomenal insights, as always, in their reports, and a lot of great details about different things and different industries and the cybersecurity landscape. But this is what really caught my attention, right? The first thing was that the top attack last year was denial of service, right? And the top assets that were involved in data breaches, number one was databases, and number four was web app servers, right? Around 25% of attacks targeted databases, and about 20% targeted web servers, right? So think about this: 45%, nearly half of all the attacks that were carried out last year targeted your databases and web servers. So isn't that a sign for us that we must be focusing on securing SQL? We are of course focusing on the Windows environment today. So doesn't that mean that we have to be focusing on SQL and IIS servers, right? Because remember, SQL servers, they're going to be storing sensitive data. They're going to be storing business sensitive data and customer sensitive data. So there's a whole bunch of compliance regulations that you have to, and security policies that you have to implement over there. And then web servers, they're front end, they're facing your customers, they're facing the public internet, and which means that they're prone to a whole bunch of attacks. And because attackers know this, and because attackers know that data is something that everyone cares about so much, databases and web servers have become top targets, right? Because whatever evolving attack technique that you see out there in the market, they are inevitably going to be targeting your databases and web servers in some way or the other, right? Nearly half of the attacks. And then the third point that was quite alarming was that 68% of the breaches took months or longer to discover, right? So what this means is that you might get a notification tomorrow from a third party, perhaps, saying that a data breach happened in your organization 2.5 or three months ago, right? And that is absolutely horrifying. So what the takeaway from all of this, and the reason why I've highlighted these figures, is that it's clear now that database and web server security is of paramount importance, right? As security team, as a security professional, you must be focusing now on securing your databases and web servers, right? Because this is what is being targeted. This is what is usually falling victim to the attackers, to the attackers' different exploits, right? And because breaches are taking so long to be discovered, the damage can be huge, right? Because if an attacker is in your database for a month, they're pretty much going to be able to access and destroy whatever they need, right? So and especially with a lot of regulations like the GDPR, I think most of our audience today is from the US and from Canada, but regulations like the GDPR are going to be implemented across the globe in the near future. And what many of these regulations expect, and a lot of other regulations do this as well, is that they expect you to report data breaches within a particular time, right? So they want to bring in accountability and say that in case you have a data breach in your organization, you have to report the data breach to the authorities within a certain period of time. And data and GDPR actually says this, and the GDPR expects organizations to report data breaches within 72 hours, right? And a lot of other compliance regulations, whether it is government specific, industry specific, or government specific regulations, they expect this sort of accountability when it comes to audits in being able to tell and report data breaches within a stipulated period of time, right? So all of these developments basically lead us to think what we should be doing to improve security of our two favorite business critical applications, our databases and web servers, right? And when it comes to implementing security measures, there are a whole bunch of basic preventive measures available that have been available for so long, which you all probably have. But what is lacking is incident detection and response, right? Because we have a lot of measures in place, right from firewalls and things like that, which are preventive. But we may not have mechanisms in place to detect attacks in real time, to detect security events of interest in real time, right? So here is where the idea of auditing comes into the picture, right? You want to have this sort of real-time security monitoring in your environment so that you're able to flag events that could lead to a potential threat or a data breach, right? So in addition to having the preventive layer of security, you want to have this monitoring layer wherein you're actually tracking different things that are happening in your environment in real time so that you're able to pick out events that could lead to a potential threat, right? So this is what we're going to be focusing more on. We want to ensure that we have security monitoring or security auditing enabled in our environment so that we can track every single thing that's going on, and so that we can report to our compliance auditors that these are the different details, different accesses and modifications and things like that that have happened over the last 6 or 12 months, and also receive alerts to detect and mitigate breaches, right? So this is what we're trying to achieve. We want to implement this kind of monitoring in our environment, and let's have a look at how we can go about doing that, right? So just a couple of points on why this is important, just reiterating what not just why it is important, but rather what you can achieve by auditing your databases and web servers, right? When it comes to databases, I think a lot of you are here today just because auditing databases is important for compliance, right? So a lot of regulations expect you to have database auditing enabled and tracking different kinds of objects in your databases for purely for a compliance perspective, right? And while that is important and a must do for a lot of you, uh, don't limit your auditing to just be for compliance, right? So compliance is just one part of the deal, and you have to do that. But over and above that, you want to implement mechanisms where you're actually able to detect and mitigate breaches to add some more value to your security program, right? So don't just limit yourself to scheduling reports for compliance. also think about using and leveraging auditing as an attack mitigation strategy, right? So compliance regulations. The main reason why I'd say you need to audit your databases is to ensure integrity of data, right? So just like some of you might have come across file integrity monitoring or FIM, so the same idea extends to the data in your database. You want to ensure that the data is not being tampered with, that the data integrity is maintained in your environment. And essentially, what you can do by auditing your databases is that you can answer some of the questions that you see on the screen, right? You can see these questions such as who accessed and modified data in your systems? Was the database access and modification approved? Are privileges being abused? Things like these you can answer in real time if you're implementing auditing the right way, right? So if you're implementing auditing and you have the uh, event information in your systems, you can essentially answer questions such as the ones that you see on your screen, right? So my point here is that the value add of database auditing goes beyond just compliance, and it actually adds a whole gives you more visibility into your environment and adds more value to your security program, right? And just as databases, web servers, I think most of you agree that the primary reason you'd want to audit your web servers is because is so you can detect attacks, right? Because when it comes to databases, while compliance is number one priority, web servers immediately, since it's front end facing, you're immediately thinking about, okay, could face some malicious requests and things like that, and you want to implement auditing here to detect attacks quickly before they jeopardize your network security, right? And there's a whole bunch of other things you can achieve. You can analyze the usage of your web server. You can really understand who's accessing, requesting for pages, requesting for information, downloading, uploading files, and things like that. And we'll get into these details over the next few slides. But ultimately, you want to audit your databases and web servers to ensure availability and security, right? So auditing has a huge role to help you with database, both in databases and web servers, to help you with availability and security, right? So this is very important, and that's what we're going to be looking at on how we can achieve that, right? So this is how we want to get started. Firstly, asset discovery, right? You want to first start off by discovering the assets in your environment. Discover the SQL servers, discover the IIS servers that you have, or rather, not discover your IIS servers, but discover the sites in your IIS server, right? So this is what you want to first do. And uh, a lot of the time, SIM solutions give you this functionality, right? So you can actually, including Log 360, you can actually discover the different SQL servers in your network and then add them for monitoring. However, before that, there is the most crucial aspect, which is to actually enable auditing on these platforms, right? So if you've worked with Windows and infrastructure or any other infrastructure really, you would know that auditing is not something that is enabled by default, right? These audit policies are not enabled by default, and it's up to the administrator to go and specify or define an audit policy on these different systems, right? So if you look at databases, you have to go to your MS SQL console and define an audit policy to tell the system what are the events it needs to generate log entries for, right? So this is very crucial, and this is step number one, which is to actually step number two, rather, after discovering your assets, to actually specify these audit policies on your different systems so that the systems start generating logs for the events that you want to track, right? So if you want to track DML or DDL events, you have to go and enable auditing on your SQL server, right? Now, once you do that, and once the logs start getting generated, your work, it might seem like your work is done, but unfortunately, Microsoft only provides us with Event Viewer that you see on the screen right here, and this is not going to cut it, right? Now, it's going to get written onto your application logs, of course, just like how you have the application log and security log and the system log. Your SQL and IIS, these logs are going to get written to the application log, right? And it's going to get really messy if you're going to use the application log and event viewer for reporting and alerting, right? And there are a whole bunch of limitations that I could do an entire session just talking about the different limitations of event viewer, right? Right from not being able to get granular alerting, not being able to run reports, whole bunch of messy things like the logs get overwritten, you lose logs. I mean, it's just very messy to work with event viewer if you want reliable reporting and alerting, right? So this is why you need a specialized tool like a SIM solution that can actually collect these logs from all of your different assets from your SQL and IIS servers, bring in these logs together, and then your SIM solution can actually automatically analyze and correlate and make sense of these logs to give you alerts for suspicious events, to give you alerts for potential threats, right? And in addition to that, in addition to these security alerts, because you've collected all of this event information, which is essentially the activities that's going on your database and web server, because you're doing that, you have a lot of event information that is archived so that you can then report for compliance, right? So because you have collected all of this information, you can generate and run reports for your compliance audits, right? So this is what the overview. This is the overview of what this entire process entails, right? So you want to ensure that you have got you're staying on top of each of these steps, right from discovering your assets to enabling auditing to collecting logs and then generating reports, setting up alerts and things like that, right? So this is the overview of the process. So when it comes to actual events that you want to track on your database, right? So these are the 5 main categories of events that we recommend you to track, right? So tracking these events essentially gives you complete visibility over what is going on in your database. It helps you understand if your database is the data in your database is secure and your database remains available, right? So this is essentially what you want to be tracking. You've got your DML and DDL events, right? Your data manipulation, data definition, and tracking these events gives you essentially a complete overview of what kinds of schema modifications such as tables are being created and dropped and things like that, and also tells you exactly which columns and which values are being modified, right? So here's a good opportunity for me to jump into the product and just going to jump into the event log analyzer module of Log360. In fact, I have another slide, the next slide, which just gives an overview of what Log360 is. And maybe now is a good time for me to just spend a minute in just talking about what Log360 is, because we've also got a question from one of our attendees, from Nick. He wants to know if are there different editions of Log360 like some of other managed engine solutions? And yes, there are additions in terms of Log360 has 4 different tools which are integrated into one single solution. You've got Event Log Analyzer, AD Audit Plus, Cloud Security Plus, and Office 365 Manager Plus. And all of these tools put together is what gives you Log360, right? So specifically for today's session, we are concerned about the Event Log Analyzer module, which is highlighted in bold. And Event Log Analyzer is essentially the log management component of Log360, and it can help you analyze logs from your SQL and IIS servers, right? So I don't want to make this a product pitch and give you too many details. So in case you want specific details, Nick or anybody else attending today, please ask your specific questions on the live chat so we can answer them there. Right, so I'm just going to jump to the Event Log Analyzer module, and I want to essentially show you what are the different events that you can track under each of these 5 categories of events to be tracked on your databases. Right, so we said DML and DDL. Right, so I want to show what kinds of events fall under these 2 categories. Right, for this, I'm just going to use the reporting section of the product and I'm just going to show you if I look at DDL, for example. So you can see these are the kinds of events that you want to track. Databases that are being created, dropped, altered. Tables that are being created, dropped, altered. Views, stored procedures, indices, triggers, all of these things. Each time any of these are created, dropped, or altered, you want to be tracking these things, right? So doing these takes care of the DDL, all of these things, right? Databases, tables, views, procedures, indexes, and triggers, right? And then when it comes to DML, the data manipulation auditing, here's where you're looking at commands being executed, schemas, inserted schemas, updated schemas, inserted tables, updated tables, and things like that, right? So are you getting a picture now of what comes under each of these events? Because it can get a little tricky if someone says DDL auditing. Exactly, this is exactly what that entails, right? So I'm just using the product to give you an idea of what are the different things that you want to be tracking, right? So if you're using another SIM solution already, see if you can leverage that tool to give you reports for each of these kinds of events, right? So you have this. This is DML and DDL, and then you have account activity, right? So account activity essentially talks about the the database user accounts and the management of these accounts, right? So you have a whole bunch of things that you can track here, right? From uh, users being created and dropped, logins created and dropped, database roles, application roles, credentials, password changes, uh, accounts that have been unlocked and things like that, right? So this comes under the account management or the user account management, and this is an important aspect that a lot of the times people ignore because we sometimes just focus on the DML and DDL audits, and we forget that our database users themselves are a potential threat to security, right? Because especially privileged users and anyone who's essentially accessing your database is a potential insider threat, right? So this is an important way to view your databases and view your security in your organization, to think that even someone who just has access to a particular resource is a potential risk, right? So irrespective of maybe he's a good guy, John, but but the point is that there is a level of security risk that is associated with any user that has access to the database, right? So this is an important aspect that you want to track that often gets missed out. And after account activity, you've got server activity. And this is again pretty important because in addition to the actual database application, you also want to be tracking the activity on the server, right? So if I look at SQL Server audit reports, you've got a whole bunch of things that are tracking backup, restoration, the transaction logs, server roles, which is again very crucial. You've got server audits and which is essentially your audit policies and things like that, audit specifications, shutdowns, all of these things that concern the database server, logons, specific logons based on users, devices, and things like that, and a general overview and trend of database server activity, right? So this is again very important. DML and DDL obviously would be priority if you're looking at compliance audits, but I wanted to stress on user account activity and server activity because these are two areas that often get ignored, and but this is very important when it comes to actually tracking attacks, right? And this is important in actually detecting attacks in your environment, right? So these are obviously very important. And then the fifth set of events are of course known attack patterns, right? So if you've got attacks like privileged abuses, SQL injection, denial of service, unauthorized copies of data. These are essentially known attack patterns on your database. So you also want to ensure that your auditing mechanisms are tracking some of these known attack patterns as well. Right. So this is an overview: DML, DDL, account, server, and known attack patterns. Right. And over and above this, MS SQL also provides what is known as advanced auditing. Right. So if any of you have already gone and tried to configure auditing on your SQL servers, you would have come across the advanced audit policies. And these are also very important because if you're able to configure advanced auditing, you're essentially able to create a optimal audit policy which is able to granularly track some of the things that you need, right? So in fact, the reason why you see these 9 points right here is because what we do with log 360 is we if you want to enable advanced auditing through the product, we essentially go and enable these 9 audit groups, right? So fail logon group, successful logon group, your object change group, a schema object change, all of these 9 things that you see on the screen is what we recommend, and it's what we automatically in case you opt to enable auditing through the product, this is what we enable, right? So in case you want to leverage advanced auditing to get more granular details about the different database activities, try to see if you can configure these 9 advanced auditing policies, right? So I just wanted to mention this as well in addition to the events that you want to track. Right. So I just want to also give you a simple example on why you want to be looking at auditing databases for more than just compliance, and look at actually auditing databases for mitigating attacks, right? So this is a simple example of what a SIM solution can do for you. And what you see is a scenario where a user through a remote device is trying to access and compromise a SQL server, right? So what he's trying to do is he's trying to use a technique like brute force, and he's having several failed logons followed by a successful logon, and then he logs onto the SQL server and then takes a backup, right? So now this is a complex chain of events in that you have an element of brute force followed by a couple of events that imply that this entire chain of events is an attack. And a SIM solution essentially can track patterns such as these, right? So the built-in correlation of event log analyzer in this case can actually track a pattern of events such as the one that you see on the screen, and give you an alert that there has been suspicious SQL backup activity on your database, right? So this is why you want to be looking at technology, specialized auditing technology, instead of event viewer, so that you're able to track complex attack patterns such as these, and you're able to ensure that you can mitigate things like these, because it's not rocket science, right? If you're able to implement this kind of auditing and have a SIM solution, that is a lot of value add to your security program, right? So I just wanted to show this simple example on how the intelligence, the correlation of a SIM solution can sort of track complex attack patterns and give you alerts over and above just reports, so that you can actually see results in terms of attack mitigation and not just for compliance, right? So this was a bit about databases. So let's move on to web servers, right? So here are events that you want to be tracking on your web servers, right? So obviously, like I said, because web servers are front end customer facing applications, you're going to be getting a lot of requests. If you want to be tracking these requests, you want to be tracking and flagging malicious requests, because this is a common entry point for attackers. Request is one thing that you want to track. And then you've got errors. You've got a whole bunch of HTTP status codes which are being thrown up by your web server. So this is something that you want to track again. And then you've got general usage, which is essentially the different queries and pages, the different users accessing your web server, the files that are being uploaded and downloaded and things like that, right? So, and again, just like databases, you also want to track known attack patterns like cross-site scripting and malicious file executions, right? So to better illustrate my point, let me jump again back to the product and show you the different kinds of events that come under each of these categories, right? So if I just go to the IIS web server reports, so essentially what you see as IIS web server top reports is is essentially tracking usage on your web server, right? So you've got users accessing the web server, the methods, pages, the queries, the images, the file types, the visitors, the browsers, status codes, the errors, the devices, and again the trend and overview, right? So this is important for analyzing usage, which is sort of important not just for security but also from an operational point of view, right? To really know if you need to scale up and things like that, right? So this is one aspect. And then you've got errors. Like I said, errors are a very good way for administrators to understand and troubleshoot, but also a way for you guys to preempt certain attacks, right? So if you see a sudden spike in HTTP 200 errors, that could mean that your web server is under attack, right? So these error codes are actually can communicate potential threats, potential evolving threats, right? So you've got a whole bunch of HTTP status codes, bad requests, bad gateway, IP address rejected, write access forbidden, and things like that. You've got a whole bunch of client and server errors. So essentially what you can do is look at tracking, in addition to just basic usage, look at tracking your errors. Analyze the errors that are being generated and thrown up on your web server, because this gives good insights into what the end user is experiencing, and also in case something anomalous or something suspicious is happening, right? So if on a given day you normally get X number of HTTP 200 errors on your web server, and on a suddenly in 1 hour you've got 20x HTTP 200 errors, this kind of anomaly could mean that some attack is underway, right? So it could also mean something like DOS is underway in your web server, right? So you've got errors, and then you've got specific attack reports, right? So you've got a whole bunch of attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, possible malicious URLs, XP command shell executions, DOS attacks, and a whole bunch of these things. So this is again something that you want to track while auditing your web servers, right? And then you've got, of course, the FTP servers, if some of you are familiar with that. So here's where you can track the files that are being uploaded and downloaded, the logons to the FTP server. These are the bunch of events that you can track when it comes to your IIS FTP, right? So you've got again, you've got both the user aspect of the users who are logging in and downloading and uploading files on your web server. So this is again something that you want to track to know exactly what's going on, right? So I also want to take the web server example as an opportunity to reiterate the importance of going beyond just reports and looking at setting up alerts to detect threats, right? So if you're using a SIM solution, you can leverage the alerting module to sort of pick and choose events for which you want alerts for, right? So you can actually have, for most of the events, you can just periodically review activity by scheduling reports. But for a whole bunch of events, you also want to set up alerts so that you are notified and you can preempt certain attacks, right? So you can actually add alerting through your SIM solution. So essentially what we do is we let you choose events on your web servers and databases. We've got a lot of pre-built alerting. We've got about 162 alerts for databases and web servers. And essentially, let me just search for something like, let me just search to say something like DOS attack, right? So let me just see, denial of service, right? So you can actually see that you can set up pick and choose events, which are essentially rules. You can see event ID 17809 or event ID 17810. So you can essentially choose these kinds of criteria, which are pre-built into SIM solutions usually, and you can choose these events for which you want alerts for. Right? So if you want alerts for denial of service detections, you can set this up via a SIM solution. So make sure you're leveraging this kind of functionality as well, because once you've implemented auditing on your databases and web servers, you have a whole bunch of data that is going to be generated for different events, and you can really leverage this not only for your compliance audits, but also for getting alerts and detecting and report, mitigating breaches. Right. So just want to take this opportunity to mention that as well. in that you can set up alerts. You can set up alerts for specific security events of interest on your databases and web servers. Right. So this is just a last bit on forensic analysis, right? Which is to say that in case something goes wrong, you might need to investigate and report an incident, right? So this was the example that I gave earlier when I said 68% of breaches get detected after 2 or 3 months, right? So in that worst case scenario, if that happens, you would again have to leverage your SIM solution and go back and check your database and web server logs from 2 or 3 months ago and backtrack the attack and look over the audit information and file a report for your internal or external audits, right? So this is essentially to say that you have three different aspects of auditing on your web server, right? So you essentially have to you're essentially able to run reports for compliance, set up alerts for detecting attacks, and also in case if something goes wrong, you are able to backtrack and get a complete picture of the attack and furnish the incident reports needed for your audits, right? So this is just to sort of wrap things up because we've looked at certain specific events that we want to track on our databases and web servers, and essentially what are the kinds of things we can achieve by enabling auditing on our SQL and IIS servers, right? So I hope this general overview of everything that we discussed was very useful, right? Some of you have been asking a lot of questions which we are answering. I'm also going to join in with answering the questions on the live chat. So in case your question hasn't been answered, just bear with us for a couple of minutes and we should be able to answer that. Apart from that, this is the end of the presentation part of the webinar. So I hope this was useful in giving you some insights on how you can get started with SQL and IIS auditing. Do ask your specific concerns on the live chat. Also take a moment at the end of the webinar to fill up your feedback form to let us know if the session was useful and you got the insights that you were looking for. And also give us suggestions on what topics you'd like to see in future webinars, right? So I'm going to jump into answering the questions. So I just want to sign off by saying thank you so much for taking your time off from your busy schedules. And if any of your football fans taking time off from the Belgium versus France semifinals to join us for today's webinar. Thank you so much and have a great day ahead.